What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I'm joined today by Michael Augello and Kelsey Surmacz of the Hockey News, coming at you as we do every Tuesday and Thursday to talk about all of the latest and greatest storylines from around the NHL in bite-sized portions. Of course, before we get into all of that news, playoff related and otherwise, do want to let you know that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now you can get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right. Well, playoffs, of course, is where we're going to start today. Taylor Hall scored with just over a minute left in overtime to give the Carolina Hurricanes their 2-0 series lead over the Philadelphia Flyers on Monday. Frederik Andersen has continued to put together a really terrific playoff run. He's given up just 7 goals in total through 6 games. He's carrying a .958 save percentage, which is the best in the playoffs. And he's also stopped 15 shots in overtime alone of game 2. So really impressive performance for him. Now, Mike, obviously there's still a lot of work to do for the Hurricanes in these playoffs. It's only the second round, but did they look like the team to beat in the East right now, especially with Andersen playing on top of his game?
Well, there's an APB out for playoff Freddie because this guy doesn't represent or is reminiscent of the guy that I've seen throughout most of his career. He's played fantastic so far, and I think Carolina benefited from the fact that they're playing suffocating team defense. And he has played well because sometimes you can play suffocating team defense like Tampa Bay did in Game 7 against Montreal and give up 9 shots and still lose. But Frederik Andersen has been up to the task. Right now, they fell behind in that game 2-0, and Carolina crawled back, and then Andersen really took the brunt of the offensive attack from the Flyers. And I think the Flyers are in trouble right now. I think they're in a situation where Carolina's on a roll. They've got that third line of Stankoven, Blake, and Hall. And Taylor Hall, this is the guy who won an MVP with the Devils. This is the guy who was the first overall pick with Edmonton. This is not the guy who played so-so with Boston and was a ghost the one year he was in Buffalo. And they got him on a very reasonable contract and playing on their third line. So, that reflects the depth and the quality of the Carolina Hurricanes right now. And right now, if you look at the Eastern Conference with Tampa Bay losing, I think they're the favorite to go to the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, like you said, the overtime period especially, it looked like all Philly until it wasn't. It was really Frederik Andersen that was kind of keeping them in it in overtime. And Kelsey, we've talked about before, goaltending was the biggest question mark for these Hurricanes coming into the playoffs and really all season, and how sustainable it was going to be. So with Andersen obviously playing on top of his game, how do you see the Hurricanes faring not only in this series, but do you agree with Mike that they make it all the way?
I think this is pretty clearly the team to be in the East right now, because that's kind of, like you mentioned, it's always kind of been the question mark for them, has been their goaltending. And also just, they've always had a pretty balanced roster, but I think, the addition of Stankoven is making a really, really, really big difference for them. And as you mentioned, Taylor Hall too. There's just not really a weakness on this team right now. And going into the playoffs, that was the question mark. Goaltending was going to be the question mark again, and you can't argue with a .958 save percentage in these playoffs so far. So do I think it's sustainable? No, it's pretty hard to keep up a .958 save percentage through 4 rounds of the Stanley Cup playoffs. I just don't think that's realistic. But if the Hurricanes continue to play the brand of defense that they're playing, not sure it's going to matter very much. And this is a Flyers team too that's struggling to score. I think for this round, I don't want to say it's going to be a cakewalk for them the rest of the way through. But if Andersen keeps playing at this level, we might see a series sweep here. But yeah, in terms of it being sustainable, I think their defense holding up and just the contributions that they've gotten from guys like Hall, Stankoven are really going to be what determines their ultimate fate this season in the playoffs. But I do think this is the year they make the final.
Well, Kelsey, you mentioned the Flyers struggling to score in this series, although early on in game 2, it didn't look that way. They scored 2 goals 39 seconds apart in that first period of game 2. Then, of course, the rest, as they say, is history. Failed to convert on any other chances for the rest of the game, despite the fact that they had the edge in scoring chances and shot attempts throughout the game. Mike, you mentioned how Carolina has been playing that kind of suffocating team defense that Rod Brind'Amour likes to execute. But the Flyers, they also played their second straight game without Owen Tippett. He's been out with an undisclosed injury since defeating the Pittsburgh Penguins in game 6 of that first round matchup. And so looking at that and with his status still unknown, up in the air, Mike, what do you think the Flyers need to do to get back into this series?
Dan Vladar can't allow a goal because right now I think, Philadelphia is averaging, 2 to 3 goals in the playoffs, and that's tough. That's tough to win on most nights. Vladar's been very good. He was one of the main reasons why they beat Pittsburgh in the first round. But they had trouble closing Pittsburgh out. They were up 3-0, and then Pittsburgh came back and made it a series. In this instance, now they're 2-0 going back to Philadelphia. Tyson Forster, who has been one of their better forwards who had a big injury, has come back and hasn't scored. Guys like that and Tippett being out of the lineup, that puts more pressure on Zegras and Konechny and a rookie like Porter Martone, who's been impressive. But, when you lose a forward like Tippett, who's one of their better scorers, it just puts pressure on everybody else. And the way Carolina's playing defense, that may be a loss that Philadelphia can't recover from.
Yeah, Kelsey, you cover the Pittsburgh Penguins, so you're very familiar with this Flyers team after having watched the first round matchup between those two teams. So looking at the Flyers and what they were able to do to overcome Pittsburgh, what are they not doing against Carolina that they need to be doing?
Well, I think the main issue here is that Carolina isn't Pittsburgh, and that's not a knock on Pittsburgh necessarily. It's just that the Flyers are basically a team that tries to play a similar brand of hockey to the Carolina Hurricanes, and they're just not as good at it as the Carolina Hurricanes are, because the Carolina Hurricanes are the very best at what they do. For most of the Pittsburgh series, we saw the Philadelphia Flyers, playing that 1-3-3 trap in the neutral zone, and for a rush team like the Penguins, for a team built around offense and scoring like the Penguins, that was giving them fits because they would basically just force turnovers, capitalize on the Penguins' defensive mistakes. Well, Carolina isn't making those defensive mistakes, and they're not making those mistakes that the Flyers can then go back and take the other way. So the Flyers are kind of running into basically just a more complete version of themselves. So I agree with Mike. I'm not really sure if they can come back in this series unless, somehow Frederik Andersen starts to fall off, or, Carolina starts making some mistakes, or they can get ahead of Carolina early. I think that's going to be the key is, getting on top of them early. But if they can't do that, this is a really hard team to play from behind against. And I just don't think just systemically and matchup wise, this is a good one for them.
Yeah, tough to beat Carolina at their own game, like you said. So we'll see what happens there. Looking out west now, we saw another second round series kick off last night when the Vegas Golden Knights took game 1 of their series against the Anaheim Ducks. They won 3-1. Ivan Barbashev scored the late go-ahead goal for Vegas with 5 minutes remaining in the third, and then Mitch Marner added the empty netter to make it 3-1 for the final. So Marner now tied with Jack Eichel for the team lead in scoring. He's got 9 points in 7 playoff games, also leads the team in plus minus at +7 through these playoffs. So Mike, as someone who notoriously has very little to say about Mitch Marner ever, what do you think about the narrative around him, in these playoffs and being someone who underperforms in the postseason? Do you think that narrative has officially been quieted yet, or if not, what's it going to take?
Nah, it has not. But the thing is, Mitch Marner, in the 2 years that he played for the Leafs where they went past the first round, was the scoring star against Tampa Bay and against Ottawa. And then in the second round, when he came up against the Florida Panthers, he disappeared. Now, it's early in the series, and his record has been he disappears in games 5, 6, and 7. So as we go deeper in the playoffs and the games become more consequential, he likely will disappear. But it may change because he's in Vegas and the pressure of being in Toronto is not there. He's played very well. But I still think that, and one of the things that's going to help him out is, Utah is a young team, not particularly evolved defensively, and Anaheim is similar in that game. Vegas really drew a lucky break because it was a puck that should have been an icing that Joel Quenneville went apoplectic about, and that ended up being the Barbashev game winner. So, Vegas was very fortunate to win that game. And Vegas has some flaws, and I think that Anaheim, with their high-powered offense and their young players, can make this a series. But I don't know who's going to win it.
Yeah, I mean, Kelsey, we knew coming into these playoffs, coming into the season, really, that the Mitch Marner playoff narrative was going to be something that followed him throughout the season. And, it's only been one series plus a game. But, what do you think he needs to do to officially put those narratives to rest? Or do you think it's just going to take time?
I mean, I think it's going to take time regardless, but he just got to keep doing what he's doing. I mean, you can't really argue with the results up to this point: 3 goals, 9 points in 7 games. And he has been a big performer for them in these playoffs. And, Mike mentioned, as the series wears on, that's when he kind of starts to slow down a little bit. I'm also curious to see how he responds, once Anaheim kind of starts to respond. I'm kind of the opinion. I don't want to say that the Mitch Marner playoff stuff was overblown before this. But, the way I look at it, if you're hovering around point per game in the Stanley Cup playoffs, you're probably a pretty good Stanley Cup playoff performer, because these aren't an easy environments to score in for every single player, even star players. We've seen star players stymied in the Stanley Cup playoffs before. And I think, as long as he keeps up what he's doing, as long as he keeps this pace for the playoffs, for however long Vegas is in the playoffs, I think that should probably kind of help lend to putting that to bed, because I think it probably should have been put to bed after last season too. So we'll just see what happens here.
Well, Mitch Marner and the Vegas Golden Knights, as we said, taking game 1 over the Anaheim Ducks. So Anaheim did not look like the same Anaheim Ducks team last night that beat the Oilers in the first round. I think they were averaging 4.3 goals per game against the Oilers. And we've talked a lot in the past about the Oilers and their defensive issues, how that would ultimately lead to being their undoing. And now, with the Ducks offense, they were completely shut down in game 1 against Vegas. And Mikael Granlund, the veteran, picked up their only goal of the game against Vegas. So, Mike, do you think this first game, again, it's only one game, so it's a small sample size, but do you think that this was a sign of the Ducks kind of coming back down to earth, or do you think it's still too early?
I think it's too early. I mean, the Ducks tried to play more of a shutdown defensive game against a team that plays that very well. And, Lucas Dostal made only 2, he only faced 21 shots and he gave up 2 goals and then the empty netter. So you could say that they were successful in playing a more playoff style of hockey, and maybe they can't play as wide open as they did against Edmonton because Edmonton's defense is pathetic. But what they have to do against, Vegas isn't going to give up a lot of offensive chances because they're a veteran laden team. And if Anaheim is going to win, they're going to have to win at their game. And, like we talked about with, Carolina playing or Philadelphia playing first Pittsburgh and then Carolina, you're playing the same type of game and you're also playing into that team's hands. So Anaheim is behind the 8 ball in that respect, but they have a lot of dynamic young offensive performers. So I think they're going to make this a series.
Yeah, Kelsey, I feel like Anaheim was a bit of a wild card just coming into these playoffs. You know, they're very well coached, and they've got some young offensive star power on their team. But again, they're young, they're inexperienced, and so you didn't really know how things were going to go for them in the postseason. I mean, again, like we said, it's just been one game, and we've seen them kind of throughout the season. This has been a very streaky team. So do you think that this could be something that ends up, being the start of their undoing in these playoffs, or do you think that they respond in a positive way after game one?
Well, I think there's always room for a response. I don't think this is going to be a 4-game, 5-game series. I think that these teams at the end of the day are pretty evenly matched. And if Anaheim can find some of that offense and continue to build on that, get to their game, it'll make things a little bit more difficult for Vegas. But I think Mike put it really, like, mentioned, the matchups. And we were talking about Philly and Pittsburgh earlier too, and Philly versus Carolina. You know, as Mike said, the Ducks met their match in the Oilers in the first round, and they were basically able to out-Oiler the Oilers. Well, they can't really do that against the Vegas Golden Knights, who play a pretty strong defensive brand of hockey. And once again, they're running into a team that's able to stop their attack off the rush, stymie their offense. So they're going to have to figure out a way to play around that. You mentioned them coming around to playing playoff hockey and them trying to play a little bit more, defensively aware. And I think that that'll help them to an extent. But in order to beat Vegas, again, just like the Carolina Hurricanes, just like the Philadelphia Flyers, when Pittsburgh played them too, you got to get ahead of these teams early. And I think that's going to be the key for them, because that forces a team like Vegas to cheat for offense, to try to generate more, rather than, sitting back and playing that more defensive style. So I think the key here is going to be getting out there early, and that could very well still happen in this series. It's only been one game. So I expect a response from them. But ultimately, it's just going to be who wins the matchup here, because this is kind of two opposite teams.
You can't out Oiler the Oilers. I like that. Looking at these playoffs now as we continue through the second round, it's still so early, still a lot of teams in play. But Mike, if you were to make an early prediction as to who might be your Conn Smythe winner, based on the top performers in the playoffs so far, who would you pick?
Well, I'll go one for each conference, because I think Carolina is the favorite to go to the final from the East. I would say Logan Stankoven, who has 6 goals right now and has just been uncontrollable. His speed and his edge work and his offense and just being feisty. I mean, he's really an annoying player to play against, but in a good way for Carolina. In the West, I expect Colorado to make the Stanley Cup final. So, I mean, the default would be either McKinnon or Makar. And, McKinnon's leading right now, and I think he has 7 points in 5 games, which, right now they've only played 5 games. They swept LA, and they played 1 game against a Minnesota team. Most of the Minnesota players are leading in the offensive categories in the NHL, but I don't know whether they're going to get by the Avalanche. So I'll go, like I said, I'll go with Stankoven, and I'll go with either McKinnon or Makar.
You stole Stankoven from me. That was my pick too. I think for the West, I'm going to go a little off book and say that if somehow Minnesota does manage to make it past Colorado, I'm going to go with Matt Boldy. Kelsey, what do you think for your picks?
Well, see, I think Minnesota is going to be Colorado. They were my pick to win the Stanley Cup this year, so we'll see how that turns out for me. I'm choosing kind of an upset here. But I agree, Matt Boldy has been fantastic for the Minnesota Wild, but I got to go with Quinn Hughes here. I mean, you can't argue with what Quinn Hughes has done in these playoffs. He has 11 points. He's driving the offense from the back end for Minnesota, and honestly, a team that's been pretty injury depleted up to this point too. So he's really stepping up in a big way. Quinn Hughes is my pick out west. As I said, I'm picking the Wild to win this series. We'll see if that holds out. But out east, I have to go back to Frederik Andersen. I don't think sometimes in playoff series, goaltenders don't get enough credit all the time. But if, he can keep putting up these numbers, I mentioned the 958 save percentage earlier. He has a 1.02 goals against average. I mean, you can talk about Stankoven, and you can talk about the Carolina Hurricanes depth on that roster. I do think they're coming out of the East this year. But at the end of the day, we mentioned it, goaltending was the big question for them coming into these playoffs, and they're getting elite goaltending. It's not easy to put up those numbers in the Stanley Cup playoffs, so my pick's got to be Freddie Andersen if Carolina makes it and goes all the way.
What a redemption arc that would be for Freddie Andersen, from playoff Freddie to actual playoff Freddie winning a Conn Smythe. So we'll see how that goes for him. Kelsey, we'll see how that goes for you with picking the Wild. I don't hate the pick, honestly. I don't hate the pick. So could make for a good series no matter what, if game one is any indication at least. Shifting over to some non-playoff news updates, the rest of the hockey world is still turning, so we still got other stuff to talk about, but new Maple Leafs GM John Chayka was introduced alongside Matt Sundin as the new additions to the team's front office this week. He was asked about how he would pitch to Auston Matthews that this is a team worth building with beyond the duration of his current contract, because we know that's a discussion that's going to be coming up. Will Matthews decide to re-sign in Toronto? And so his quote was this: "It is our job to sell him on what we're capable of and reaching the ultimate goal, because I know that's what's important to him." And how do we do that? It's not a sales job, I'd say. It's more of a what's the vision, what's the plan, and concrete steps that we're going to take to try to get the team to where he wants to be. We share that same common goal, end quote. So, Mike, if you were GM of the Maple Leafs, first of all, what do you think of that response? And what would your pitch be to Auston Matthews and how you can actually turn things around and be competitive again?
It's a good, well-prepared response. It doesn't really say anything because it doesn't say what the vision is. Chayka did well at the press conference, so did Matt Sundin, but the clown car was MLS&E boss Keith Pelly, who should never hold a press conference ever again. And I think that he basically said to Kevin Adams, "Hold my beer," when it came to the Palm Trees press conference, because this was an unmitigated disaster. But Chayka's been given the job. He's gotten his first thing is, talking to Matthews and selling him on his vision. Chris Johnston from The Athletic reported this morning that Matthews is still undecided about what his future is in Toronto. So that is, priority number one, talking to him and selling him on the vision. What does that mean? I mean, free agency is a joke this year. There's only 3 or 4 really good players. Trading, you need draft picks or prospects to trade, and they're low on both. So what is the plan? I mean, I think right now John Chayka is holding his prayer beads, hoping that the Leafs win the lottery or at least pick in the top 5 to get a player who could really help them, maybe even next year. So, I mean, that might be part of the plan. So we'll wait and see what happens after Tuesday night.
Yeah, because Kelsey, if Matthews decides not to return to Toronto, that is a decision that it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? So it's going to really kind of affect maybe what this vision is, this elusive vision that we're talking about for the Maple Leafs. So if you're trying, obviously, if you're the Maple Leafs GM and it's presumably you're trying to convince him to stay, to keep whatever your current vision is intact, how would you go about doing that?
Well, first of all, just to build off something Mike said, it starts with defining the vision. I mean, you can't just say you have a vision and then just not say what it is, especially for, the guy that's the central piece to all of this. And, you got 2 years left on Matthews' contract. And as you mentioned, he has said that his future is uncertain. And if you're looking at the Toronto Maple Leafs talent pool, they have one of the worst ranked prospect pools in the league. Mike mentioned that they have basically 0 draft capital. It basically hinges on them getting a lottery pick and them being able to scout, develop, and draft well in these next couple years. So, I mean, if you're talking about a pitch to Matthews here, I think it has to kind of focus on some of the core that you already have in place there and just say, like, hey, we have a good foundation for this. You guys are still young enough. You guys can still be here, for this turnaround. It might take a year or two, but we have all the confidence in the world that this core is still the core that can get it done. So I think the talk probably has to center around the core and potentially adding one of those lottery picks and adding another piece of that core, because outside of that, it just doesn't look very good for this team, in the long-term outlook. So think it's got to be centered on the talk of the core. Otherwise, it's looking pretty bleak in terms of assets and the way that they can manage their way around this.
Emma, the situation here is Matthews has 2 years left in his contract, and unless he's prepared, if he goes in and says, well, I don't think the timetable for the Leafs matches my timetable because I'm in my prime right now and I want a Stanley Cup, then the only recourse is to open up the process and say, okay, we can trade you anywhere so we can get the most value for you. And then after 2 years, you're the highest paid player in the league. You have to make it a positive for the Leafs to be able to move him. Obviously, he's going to want to go where he wants to go, which that limits what they can get back. So it's like a Quinn Hughes situation. Vancouver got a bevy for Quinn Hughes, but you got Quinn Hughes, and he's a superstar. Whoever's getting Auston Matthews is getting a superstar. So unless he's prepared to open up the process and go anywhere, he's going to be in Toronto at least this year.
Yeah, he is definitely in the driver's seat for this one for sure. We talk about with the Maple Leafs with the lottery coming up tonight. That's going to be one of the teams that's going to be really crossing their fingers for a top 5 pick. At the end of the draft lottery, though, the Calder Trophy finalists are going to be announced as well. And, Matthew Schaefer, of course, heavy betting favorite to win the award. He scored 23 goals, put up 59 points as an 18-year-old defenseman in his rookie season. Other notable rookie standouts would be guys like Ivan Demidov with Montreal, Beckett Seneca with Anaheim, Jimmy Snuggerud with St. Louis. You've got some rookie goaltenders that have made some noise this year as well. Guys like Dobish with Montreal and Jesper Wallstedt with Minnesota. So definitely a lot of rookie talent this year. But Mike, I feel like the award is basically Schaefer's to lose, right? Are there other rookies that even have a case to win this award?
I would say the only one that has an outside chance would be Seneca, because I thought he was consistent throughout the year. And, the one criticism of Schaefer is that he sort of trailed off a little bit at the end of the year, especially when the Islanders were in a playoff race. But an 18-year-old kid playing the number of minutes and playing the role that he did and being as great as he was, and, even being on the radar for the Canadian Olympic team, and some people thinking if they picked him, they would have won and instead of losing to the U.S. So, to me, if I was voting for the Calder, he would have been number 1 on my ballot, and Seneca would have been number 2.
Kelsey, what do you think?
I think this is a pretty easy choice. I think that Schaefer is going to be the runaway favorite here, and this is again his trophy to lose. But I wouldn't count out Demidov either. He had 62 points this season. He actually outscored Schaefer. So I think that there could be an argument there for him as well. He put together a really nice season for Montreal. Even though he's not scoring at a torrid pace in the playoffs, he is still contributing for them in other facets of the game. So, again, I think this is Schaefer's to lose. I don't think there's much contest here. What he did as an 18-year-old in the National Hockey League in his rookie season as a defenseman is just supremely impressive, and I don't think there's any topping that. But if I had to pick somebody else, I guess the runner-up, it would be Demidov for me.
All right. Well, we will find out who the 3 finalists are, or I should say the 2 finalists in addition to Matthew Schaefer after the draft lottery later tonight. Of course, if you want to read any more about any of these Calder Trophy finalists, about the draft lottery, or about the playoffs, anything else that we've talked about today, a reminder to head over to the Hockey News. It's been the go-to for all things hockey since 1947. 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start is a must-have for any fan. Head to thn.com/free and grab your subscription today. That's going to do it for today's episode of the Wraparound. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in and listened to us talking some hockey today. We really do appreciate it. We'll be back with an all-new episode on Thursday. But for now, for Michael Augello and Kelsey Surmacz, I'm Emma Lingan. This is the Wraparound, and we will see you next time.